Hi there, this is Dana. In this tutorial video, I'm going to be showing you how to use Satin Stitch and Backstitch to create a really cute little pride flag. So there are a couple of different types of pride flags. I'm going to be using the traditional, air quotes, traditional one. But there are a couple different varieties, like there's a pansexual one, there's all kinds of really cool ones. So you can do this with any of those as well. You just have to adjust your pattern a little bit. But first we're going to just be going through the basic stitches, and then you can adjust it, do all the things that you like. So first you're going to be needing, for this pattern in particular, I'm using a 4-inch embroidery hoop. You can of course blow up your pattern bigger and use any size hoop you want. You can stitch this onto fabric like clothing or whatever. I will talk about that a little bit more later. You're obviously going to need a needle. So I've got a pack here of Clover embroidery needles. I tend to use roughly the size 6 needle for embroidery and such, but you can use any size. As long as it's a sharp needle, you don't even need to get like the special embroidery needles. It just has to be a sharp one for embroidery. There's that. Obviously you're going to need fabric. I'm using a lovely Normandy fabric from Zweigart Fabrics, which is just beautiful. It's got a lovely texture to it. But any kind of fabric will work, like quilting cotton, anything is fine. If this is your first time doing embroidery and you want to trace your pattern, I'd recommend a lighter fabric just because it makes tracing a little bit easier, and also it allows you to see your lines a little bit easier when you're drawing on it. So you need your fabric. You can see I've already traced my design onto this. If you want tips about how to do that, I just held the pattern up to a window and then traced it through. Then we'll leave a link in the blog post in the description below about how to do that. Some different ways you can transfer your pattern onto your fabric. Obviously, to do that, you're going to need some kind of pen. I'm using a friction pen here. These are great. These are actually like erasable. They've got a little eraser here, but what this actually does is it creates heat, which erases the ink. So on fabric and other things like this, you can use the friction pens and then just blast it with a hairdryer or an iron, and that will actually make your lines disappear. I would still recommend washing it afterwards just to make sure any residue is gone, because the lines sort of can come back later. But yeah, this is actually pretty cool stuff. I love my friction pens. And you're gonna obviously need some embroidery scissors. Anything is fine. They don't have to be fancy, but fancy is always fun. And you're obviously gonna need your printed pattern as well. So this is a 2-page pattern. You can see the main pattern here. This is what you can trace from. And then I've got a little stitching map included as well. It's got all your colors and how many strands you're going to need. I'll cover that in a moment. For the colors, these are just general recommendations of the colors. Like, this is just what I had that sort of matched the colors of the traditional pride flag. You can use any colors that you want, like any shades of these colors. And yes, I realize the irony is real that the red tone is 666. I get it. I think it's actually hilarious. But anyway, enough of that. So we're going to cover Satin Stitch in this tutorial and Backstitch. So, what I forgot to mention, obviously, is if you want to back your fabric once it's finished, like I'll put this in hoop in a second, but if you want to back it and make it so this hoop itself is like a giftable thing, or you can hang it as is, you might also want to get some felt, and it has to be big enough for their hoop. So if your hoop's a 4-inch hoop, then you're going to want at least a 4-inch square of felt. As you can see here, this is one thing I've done with one of my Skillshare class tutorials. This is like the big, hand embroidery fundamentals class. So you can see I finished off the back here. So if you want to take this whole class, that's on Skillshare, and I'll put a link to that below also. But I'll actually leave you a link to just the tutorial of how to do this type of finishing as well, in case you want to do that at the end. So we've got our hoop, we've put our smaller hoop underneath. You can see I've put actually some markings on the pattern when I was tracing it, just to generally indicate where the edge of the hoop was going to land. It's not a big deal, because you can do this once you're putting it down. Alright, loosen that up a bit. So when you're putting it in the hoop, you just want to make sure everything's straight and happy, especially as this flag is straight lines with the rectangle. You can also do this as a shape, like a heart shape or whatever. I'm choosing to do it as like a flag shape just because it's going to be a lot easier for you to practice the stitches with than curved edges of a heart shape or anything else. Tighten that up. So as you can see here, here's all my colors. And like I said, these, you can use any shades of these that you like. Like if you want to do pastel version, go for it. If you want to do like super bright, go for it. Like these are just what I happen to have in my stash. And the nice thing about this is it doesn't take up a lot of floss for each color, so you can actually do this kind of project and use up leftovers if you have them from any other random projects. So I've got 3 strands here on my needle. I've put a knot in the end. I'm using DMC floss. I find it to be really good as far as being color fast. Like you can wash this and it doesn't leach dyes. Some other dyes, you're not, or some other floss, you're not really sure. But Anchor is good, Madeira is good, DMC is good. So you can see I've got the yellow, but you know, any of you who know the rainbow, the pride flag, it goes from red, orange, yellow. That one backwards. Red, orange, yellow, green, blue, purple. So the reason I'm starting with the yellow instead of, say, the red, which is at the top, is with Satin Stitch, you kind of want to almost start in the center and work your way out, and that way your lines are going to be even. If this was going to be on a piece of clothing, I wouldn't necessarily run your stitches horizontally like this, because these are quite long stitches and they could get caught on something if it's on a wearable piece of clothing that's going to get washed, or that's going to, you know, have things rubbing up against it. Like if it's a hat or something, probably fine. But if it's like on a jacket or something that, you know, might get snagged, these are going to be quite long stitches. So in that case, I would do the stitches vertically, or you could do almost like a basket weave patchwork, like alternate vertical and horizontal in little blocks. But for this one, I'm going to show you horizontal just because it's going to be easier to demonstrate and easier for you to practice. So as again, we've got our colors here, so red, orange, yellows here. So you're going to start right on the edge of your line. You're basically always wanting to come up and come down on your drawn lines. It's going to really help you keep a nice even edge. Going to come up, and as I said, this is 3 strands, and then you're going to go back down exactly horizontal, or as horizontal as you can. You're wanting a nice straight line. Bam. So with Satin Stitch, a lot of people freak out because their first attempts kind of end up looking a little bit chunky and lumpy and all the things. It's totally fine. Like, please don't worry about that, because I mean, it takes practice, and it does depend how many strands you're using as well. Like if you're, I'm using 3 strands here. The normal embroidery floss is 6 strands. You can separate out how many you want. If you're using, say, 1 strand, it's obviously going to take you a lot longer to do an area, but the strands are going to lie a lot smoother, a lot flatter, because they can kind of nestle in amongst each other. Whereas if you're using like a full 6 strand, it's going to be a little bit chunkier, but you're going to also stitch a lot faster and use, you know, like less stitches to get to the finished product. So it's sort of all up to you. I did 3 just to sort of show you a half and half method. So what I'm doing is I'm coming up and coming down immediately next to the stitches, and you can see I'm actually doing a loop. You don't come up and then come down, and I'll show you what I mean. And it will make more sense once you actually start doing this. So you can see I'm just going in the same direction. You can start from left to right or right to left, but whichever way you choose, stick with that for that particular section of color, because it helps it lie flatter and it keeps your tension even. And yes, you will use floss on the back, and it's fine. Like even my local embroidery shop here, stitching shop, they sell the skeins for, I think it's like $1.10, something like that, but it works out to like 2 cents per strand per meter. Like it's you know, floss is not expensive, so please don't worry about like wasting floss. Okay, so that's mostly covered there. And then we're going to come back down and go the other direction on the other side. So as I said, the reason I started in the center and worked out and center and worked out is that keeps your lines parallel. If you start at one edge and kind of work your way from one edge all the way across, it's really easy for your lines to start getting wobbly, and that's when things can start looking a little funky. But again, it's all a learning process. Nothing to panic about. have to change my floss, I think, for the last stitch. Okay, so it's actually pretty good. Might just leave it there. So you can see that's the yellow done. And it's not too bad. You can run your finger across it and it helps smooth the strands out a little bit. If you find your floss is getting twisted when you're stitching with it, just drop your needle with the thread still attached and it will unspin it, and you can actually manually untwist your needle too, and that will help it help your floss lie flat and parallel, which is, I don't want to say it's important for satin stitch, but it kind of is in the sense that you do want the strands to lie as flat as they can. But like I said, please don't like worry about this if it's your first time doing this and you're not sure like if it's going well and it's looking a little bit chunky. For some reason I'm getting Latrice Royale in my head. Chunky yet funky. So there you go. So that's the first color there. I'll show you again with the orange. So again, you're going to want 3 strands. So this one was used for another project, so I'll separate out 3 strands so I can show you that. So however many you've got left, just separate out 3. And if you pull them apart really gently, you can separate out multiple strands at a time. Otherwise, what you can do is just pull one out and let it kind of unspool as you're pulling it out, and then that will, and then you put all the individual strands back together, and that gives you your required number of strands. You can see I'm going quite gently with this so it doesn't catch and knot, which would be not good. Alright, so again, got our 3 strands, got my needle. I'll show you how to do a quilter's knot too in case you don't know. It's super handy. Alright, thread a needle. So quilter's knot's really easy. Just pinch the floss under your needle, so you're sort of pinching it, wrap the floss around a few times tightly, and then you're going to actually pinch that whole thing with between your fingers and just pull your thread through gently, making sure you don't pull so fast that it knots up on you early. But if you keep holding the pinch, by the time you get to the end, it's formed a perfect little knot. Isn't that lovely? Alright, so same thing again, we're going to do the orange bar here. So again, we're starting in the center of the bar. Down. If you've got a really wide area that you're stitching with satin stitch, I would break it up into little sections, and you can even draw, like get your marker or your pen or whatever you're using, and you can actually draw lines parallel to the direction that you're traveling, and that will actually help really you keep on the parallel so that you don't start drifting with your line work. That's sort of one of the most important things with satin stitch, is just keeping the lines going the same direction. But like I said, if you do want to do this like a basket weave type thing, like if you do want this on clothing, and it'll give it a really cool texture too, is what you could do is just divide up your, of course the ink's dried out, but if you divided up your pattern into little bars like that, and you do like this section this way, this section this way, this section this way, that would look really cool, and then the stitches are going to be shorter and they're not going to catch on something. Or you could just do all of them vertically rather than horizontally. It's all up to you. You can do whatever you want. The point of hand embroidery is it's meant to look hand embroidered. So if it doesn't look like a machine did it, good! That's the whole point. Again, we're going right next to where your previous stitch was. Trying to land right on that line. And go back down the bottom one. depending on the texture of your fabric too, you may actually find that you can actually follow the grain of the fabric, and that you can like actually follow the strands of the fabric and make sure to keep your lines nice and straight. So it looks like it's closed there, but there's actually room for one more stitch. So I'm going to lay that down. Bam. So we've got 2 done. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to finish this off, and then I'll come back once this part is finished, and then I will show you how to do the back stitch. And one thing to note too, like if you find your ends are getting really wobbly and stuff like that, it's totally okay. I will show you how with the back stitch you can kind of fix that. So I'll be back in a moment once I've finished stitching all of the other colors. Alright, and we're back. So you can see I've finished all the colors. So a couple of tips: if you find that you're getting like little gaps in between different sections and stuff like that, what you can do is you can go over it again with another layer of your floss. So like say there's a gap right in the middle of the yellow and you're like, don't like that. You can start again at the edge. Make sure you're still doing the parallel lines like in the direction of travel of your floss, and go up and over again. You can use the same number of strands if it's a decent size gap, or you can just switch to 1 strand and then you can just individually fill in little gaps like that. That's one good way to do it. And also, I kind of actually did this on purpose so you could see. You can see that my line didn't quite match up with the straight line here. Like where I started was, you know, a millimeter or so away from the actual line. So it's kind of created this almost sort of little jagged edge here along the edge. But you can leave it, which is fine. And that's what I'm going to do, just because, like I said, it's meant to look handmade. And if anybody gives you a hard time, just tell them, no, that's not how you roll. Or what you can do is you can actually outline this with Backstitch, which I'm going to show you next, and that will give it a nice straight edge. You can use like a contrasting color like a black or any color that you like, and that will sort of clean up your edges, so to speak, if you choose to do that. I personally am not going to, because yeah. And also the irony is not lost on me that I'm teaching you a very satin stitch, which is a straight stitch for a pride flag. The irony is not lost on me. Just throwing that out there. Alright, so for Backstitch, I'm actually going to keep this really simple. I'm going to show you just, these are basically just going to be straight lines, but I will show you like actual air quotes backstitch for the curved letters, because you can't obviously do straight lines for curved letters unless you want to make them look super blocky, which again, to your project, you can do whatever you like. So I'm going to put a knot in my thread. I'm using 2 strands of the blue, which is DMC 517, if you want to match the colors I'm using. Again, you can even throw in another color like black, whatever floats your boat. So I'm just going to be doing these purely as straight stitches because it is sort of a small project. This is just going to be framed as a hoop. So once I get to the curved letters, and you'll see why it's called backstitch. Right now this is basically straight stitch. But again, if you are going to wear this on a piece of clothing and you have made it bigger, I would definitely do multiple stitches for these rather than one longer stitch, just because it's going to prevent the chances of it getting caught on something or snagged. And that would suck, because then there goes all your lovely hard work. Alright, so there's that. So with the backstitch, your first stitch is kind of going whichever direction you want to go, really. I mean, there is no sort of forward and backward, really. But the trick is when you're doing your second one, it comes back. It comes the opposite direction that you just put your first stitch in. That's why it's called backstitch, because you're always going back into that last hole that you made. With curves, with backstitch, the shorter your stitches, the more it's going to look curved and less blocky. So again, that's a stylistic choice. You can curve them, you can not. Just getting caught up on the back. There we go. Especially for things like script or something like that, where it is quite a curvy font, then I would definitely use shorter stitches. The more you do backstitch and embroidery in general, the more you kind of get a feel for what length of strand, or sort of what length of stitch is best for particular looks that you're going for. And also same as number of strands. I'm using 2 strands here just so that the line work is a little bit more delineated and more legible, but you definitely could use 1. For this size I wouldn't go up as many as 6, and they're all going to just kind of blend together, which again might be the look you're going for. So with your last stitch you're coming up the hole so that they all join up. Bam! And that's pretty much it. And so for the rest of these, other than the S's and the L's, I'm just going to keep going. So I'm going to pause the video and you'll see when it's done. Alright, so there we go. Done! So you can use this as, like I said, on clothing, or you can use it for all sorts of things. I would love to see your projects. Please feel free to tag me at Peacock and Fig if you put this onto Instagram or anything like that. And I hope you have a great day. Happy stitching!